Okay, let's really unpack this. Think about your own journey for a second. We all went to school, right?
Mm-hmm. Pretty much everyone.
And for most of us, there's this story we carry around, almost like a comforting myth, that education is the great equalizer.
Yeah, that's the ideal, isn't it?
It is the place where, no matter your background, you get a fair shot, your potential gets nurtured, and you climb the ladder based on effort, on smarts. It's a lovely idea.
It really is.
But what if that comforting myth isn't quite the whole picture? What if the system we trust, the one promising that upward mobility for everyone, is actually maybe designed to do something else for different groups?
And that's what's truly fascinating here. What our sources really dig into is this, provocative idea that maybe there isn't just one education system. Maybe there are two.
Two systems?
Yeah, two distinct parallel systems running at the same time. One system, as these texts describe it, it's really meticulously built around training the masses to follow. Be efficient, be compliant.
Okay. And the other one?
The other is profoundly different. It's geared specifically towards training a select few to rule. And this isn't just like a slightly different curriculum. It's a fundamental difference in the goal. And that subtly shapes destinies right from the start.
And that's exactly what we want to explore in this deep dive. We're aiming to get beneath the surface of education, past that familiar story. Our sources, we've got these powerful excerpts from things like how the elite are trained to rule, and in a world increasingly shaped by inequality, also what real learning looks like. And that classic quote, education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. They really challenge our assumptions.
They absolutely do. They peel back the layers on what might be a carefully designed system.
Right. So our goal here is to pull out the most important nuggets, the actionable bits from these sources, so you can really get a handle on why some rise to power while others seem conditioned to obey it.
And maybe, even more importantly, what we can all do about it.
Yeah.
How we can maybe reclaim our own learning.
Exactly. So let's start right there, challenging that core belief. Education as the great equalizer. It's such a powerful ideal.
It is. But the sources paint a very different picture.
Yeah, one of our key texts quotes the sociologist Caroline Purcell, and she puts it so bluntly. The education of the ultra-rich differs from the education of the poor as widely as their lives differ.
Wow. That's stark.
It really is. If education is supposed to level the playing field, how can that disparity be so huge? The material we looked at suggests it's not just about, funding gaps or teacher quality. Those matter.
Sure, they play a role.
But it argues there are, like you said, these two entirely parallel systems working with different aims, different outcomes.
Exactly. And that ties right into what some sources call the bell curve myth.
Ah, the bell curve. We all learned about that in stats.
Right. That distribution where most people are average, fewer at the extremes, it often gets used, maybe implicitly, to justify why some people succeed and others don't, as if it's just natural ability.
Like it's set in stone.
Precisely. But these sources argue that interpretation hides a critical truth. The rules are not the same for everyone. Ability matters. Effort matters, of course, profoundly.
Sure.
But if you zoom out, connect it to the bigger picture, what really shapes destiny isn't just raw talent. It's hugely influenced by access to opportunity, by exposure to power, by the kinds of environments that either nurture or suppress potential. The argument here is pretty strong. This curve isn't just organic, it's engineered.
Engineered, that's a powerful word. It implies intent.
It does. Engineered through social structures, how resources are allocated, even subtle cultural messages that steer people onto very different paths from a young age.
So if it's engineered, and then there are these two systems, what actually happens inside those elite schools, prep academies, and Ivy League pipelines, the ones supposedly training people to rule?
Well, the sources get quite specific. And the differences they highlight are, they're pretty stark when you lay them out.
Like what?
It's about fostering a whole mindset. Things like debate, not silence.
So not just speaking up, but arguing effectively.
Exactly. Constructing arguments, defending them, thinking on your feet. Crucial leadership skills, right? Not something you typically get in a sit-and-listen class.
Sure. What else?
Strategy, not memorization. They're learning to apply knowledge. Think ahead.
Okay.
Networking, not isolation.
Bro.
Building those deep, lifelong connections. And maybe most importantly, ownership, not obedience.
Ownership. What does that mean in this context?
It means they're being taught how systems work, not just how to get by within them, but how to actually design and dominate them.
Wow. While most kids are prepping for standardized tests.
Right, which mostly measure recall. These students, the sources say, are literally being trained to pass power around. It's a fundamentally different objective, different skill.
That makes sense. And it goes deeper than just the classes, right?
Oh, absolutely. The sources really hammer this point. Confidence is taught, too. It's not just something you're born with.
It's engineered, like the bell curve idea.
Exactly. It's engineered. From day one, elite kids get these specific, powerful messages ingrained. You belong in the room. Your ideas matter.
That's huge.
Isn't it? And think about this one. Failure is feedback, not punishment. Imagine internalizing that instead of seeing mistakes as shameful. It changes your whole approach to risk, to learning.
Totally. Fear of failure holds so many people back.
Right. So the goal isn't just getting good grades. It's about learning how to lead a world that bends for them. It's psychological shaping, really, preparing them to step up and take charge.
And that connects to this idea of access is invisible power, doesn't it?
Perfectly. Because it's not just what happens in the classroom. It's the whole context that matters. Massively.
Like what kind of context?
Things like easy mentorship from influential figures, people who open doors, global experiences that broaden horizons and networks, learning the unspoken etiquette of leadership, knowing how to act in certain circles.
The subtle stuff.
Very subtle. And even just family conversations about capital, law, and legacy. Dinner table talk that gives them a sophisticated understanding of how the world really works from a young age.
Yeah, you don't get that in Econ 101.
Not usually. And the sources are clear. None of this is illegal. It's not secret, exactly, but it is absolutely invisible to those never invited. It's a whole ecosystem designed to cultivate leadership and influence.
Okay, so that's the elite track. Now let's pivot. What about education for the masses, the system most of us experienced? How does that compare?
Well, the contrast drawn by the sources is pretty dramatic. This mainstream system, they argue, primarily emphasizes obedience, punctuality, and memorization.
The 3 R's of compliance, almost.
You could say that. It prepares workers like a factory model, not necessarily entrepreneurs or critical thinkers.
And it actively discourages questioning the system.
That's a key point they make. It fosters compliance over inquiry. And often it teaches history and economics in simplified, often sanitized terms.
Which might hide the more complex, maybe uncomfortable truths about power?
Exactly. It's a different kind of preparation, designed for a different societal role, according to these analyses.
And this brings us to the hidden curriculum. What's that about?
Right, the hidden curriculum. The sources call it the unspoken, unofficial set of lessons we absorb in school. Stuff we learn without even realizing we're being taught.
So, beyond math and history, what is this hidden curriculum teaching us?
Well, according to these sources, it subtly instills things like obedience to authority. Just follow the rules. Don't rock the boat.
Okay.
It promotes competition over collaboration. Think about grading curves, fighting for the top spot.
Yeah, it's often individualistic.
Very. It teaches silence over questioning. It can feel risky to challenge things. And it values conformity over creativity. Fitting in is often rewarded more than standing out.
The implication sounds kind of bleak.
It is quite chilling when you read it laid out like that. The sources basically say, we're taught to follow, not to lead. To ask for permission, not to think for ourselves, to fear failure rather than explore boldly. It's this subtle conditioning.
And you mentioned the factory model earlier. This sounds directly linked to that industrial conditioning.
Absolutely. The sources trace a lot of this back to the 19th century factory school model. The goal then wasn't necessarily about unlocking every child's unique potential.
What was the goal?
Primarily, efficiency and obedience. Creating a compliant workforce for industrial jobs.
And we see echoes of that today.
Think about the structure of a typical school day. The examples the sources give. Bells ring. You must sit. You must ask to speak up. There's only one right answer. Don't challenge the teacher.
Wow. Yeah. Those are standard practices.
Right. And repeated daily. For years, they subtly train us to fit into a system, follow instructions without question. It conditions us for a certain role.
So if that's what's being taught, implicitly or explicitly, what's being left out? What are the real tools for life that are missing?
That's a crucial question the sources tackle. They point out a lot. Things most mainstream schools don't consistently teach, like practical financial literacy.
Definitely needed that one.
Tell me about it. Also, real critical thinking about media and power. Not just analyzing literature, but analyzing the forces shaping our world.
Okay.
Sophisticated emotional intelligence. Understanding ourselves and others, the ability to embrace creative failure, seeing mistakes as learning moments.
Like the elite schools teach.
Exactly. and skills like leadership, negotiation, and systems thinking, plus just basic essential life skills. The contrast is stark because in elite circles, these things are taught quietly, confidently, through experience and access.
So most people are trained to play a game without knowing all the rules or even how the game board was designed.
That's a good way to put it. Trained to compete within someone else's structure, without the tools to build their own.
And how is this reinforced? The sources mention fear and reward.
Yes, the levers of control. They break it down quite effectively. Think about how grades become a form of control. They motivate, sure, but they also enforce compliance.
Perform for the grade, not necessarily for understanding.
Precisely. And silence becomes safety. It feels less risky than speaking up and being wrong. Praise becomes addictive. So we seek external validation instead of developing internal conviction.
We learn to perform, not to understand.
Exactly. We learn to hide what we don't know because mistakes feel shameful. This creates this whole culture of waiting to be chosen, needing approval, beliefs that can really limit our agency later in life.
Okay, this is a lot to take in. It paints a challenging picture. But if this is the reality the sources describe, the big question is, so what can we do?
Right. And thankfully, the sources don't just diagnose the problem. They're very focused on empowerment, on liberation.
Where do we start?
The very first step, they insist, is crucial. Stop believing in meritocratic fairy tales. Just acknowledging that the playing field might not be level is foundational.
That takes courage, admitting the story we were told might be flawed.
It really does. But it's necessary to move forward. The core action then becomes study power, unlearn the obedience curriculum, re-educate yourself in what was left out.
Okay, study power. What does that look like practically? What should we be learning?
The sources give concrete examples. Things like game theory and negotiation, understanding strategic interactions.
Useful everywhere, not just business.
Absolutely. Also, capital structures and ownership, demystifying how wealth actually works, strategic storytelling and soft power, how narratives create influence.
Learning to tell your own story effectively.
Exactly. Legal fluency and civic literacy, knowing the rules and your rights, and critically, learning about building institutions, not just fitting into them.
So the goal isn't just to climb the existing ladder, but maybe build a new one.
Precisely. It's about liberation through understanding, gaining real agency, not just mimicking the elite.
That's a powerful shift. So if we're moving past that old model, what does real learning look like according to these sources?
They describe it beautifully. It's learning that's rooted in curiosity, driven from within, not just by grades.
Okay.
It doesn't punish mistakes. It studies them, sees them as data. It doesn't end at tests. It evolves with life. It's ongoing.
Lifelong learning, really.
Yes, and it doesn't demand silence. It grows through dialogue. It values exchange, different perspectives. The best learners aren't just rule followers. They're sense makers, creators, and truth seekers.
That sounds much more dynamic.
It is. And it involves a key shift, moving from focusing only on content to understanding context.
What do you mean by that?
Well, most of us learn facts without frameworks.
Right.
We get the what, but not the why or the how it connects.
Right. Isolated subjects.
Exactly. Real education, they argue, is interdisciplinary, collaborative, emotional, political, personal. Because life isn't lived in neat little subject boxes, right?
No, definitely not.
So why should learning be? They even talk about life design as the new literacy.
Life design, like designing your whole life.
Kind of. It's about consciously crafting your existence, understanding your emotions, managing finances strategically, communicating effectively, designing work that has purpose for you, becoming the architect of your own life, not just reacting.
That feels incredibly empowering. Which brings us back to this idea of liberating education.
Yes, the sources are very direct here. If your education makes you dependent, fearful, passive, then it's really just training.
Oof, okay.
True education should do the opposite. It should expand your agency, give you power to act.
Makes sense.
It should connect you to community, build collective power. It should prepare you to question systems, not just accept them, and ultimately empower you to build new ones. Be a creator, not just a consumer.
So how do people actually do this if they didn't go to those elite schools?
That's the best part. The sources emphasize you don't need special permission or a fancy degree. You can start where you are. Learn what was hidden.
How? What are the practical steps?
They suggest things like actively read stuff that challenges your worldview, not just confirms it. Journal like your inner child is your wisest guide. Explore your own thoughts.
I like that.
Join or build learning communities. Have real conversations. And proactively learn those skills school missed. Storytelling, investing, systems thinking, emotional mastery.
So taking ownership of your own learning journey.
Exactly. The core message is real education isn't something done to you. It's something you choose to do. And it's truly never too late to become that conscious, self-directed learner.
So as we wrap this up, hopefully you listening are starting to see your own educational path and the whole system maybe through a slightly different lens now. It's about shifting from being conditioned to conscious. The game, as a source has laid out, it's real. The rules often are hidden. But the key is, now that you start to see them, now that you have this understanding, you don't have to play blind anymore.
And that raises a really important question for all of us, doesn't it? The world probably doesn't need more compliant, obedient workers following instructions. What it desperately needs is more free thinkers, creators, and citizens who understand how power works.
Yeah.
True education, like one source beautifully puts it, isn't really about climbing that ladder someone else built. It's about realizing you can build your own. It's like that Yeats quote you mentioned earlier.
Education is not the filling of a pail,
But the lighting of a fire within each of us.
a fire of curiosity, critical thinking, agency. That's really what we hope has been sparked a bit today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into what education is and what it truly could be.
Yeah, keep questioning, keep learning.
Definitely. We encourage you to continue your own journey of conscious learning and questioning everything.